For me, expansion is all about extending yourself, spreading your wings, stepping into new territories that you haven't touched before, places you haven't been before, metaphorically and literally.
Welcome to Warriors at Work. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. Warriors at Work is a place where everyone in the workplace can come together, gain insight, encouragement, tell stories, connect, and share wisdom. We are a place of like-minded people at different stages of life, all coming together with a shared interest of enlightening and inspiring one another. If you're interested in going from the predictable to the potent, and you want to find your warrior magic, step into the journey with us. Welcome to Warriors at Work. Hi everyone, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for being here with me at the Warriors at Work podcast. So I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions. Do you ask for help? When you're stepping into the world, do you do it with a level of intention and soul? Do you take lessons from your life experiences and use that to inform and expand your perspective? As a seeker in life, I look at the world through the lens of learning and mastery. I am drawn to other seekers who share the desire to access, activate, and elevate other people. Maryanne Spatola is a key part of my warrior network because of the importance she places on seeing greatness in others and doing everything she can to help them bring their best self to the world. She has literally made a career out of it. She started in HR, went all the way up to a senior executive level as a chief human resources officer. She's pivoted into her own executive coaching practice and leadership development guru. She's also a professor at NYU. And it was such a privilege to have this conversation with Maryanne about her warrior journey and how she is expanding her footprint into the world with intention and soul. If you are yearning for perspective, knowledge, community, or maybe you just need some inspiration or confirmation that you have everything you need right now to make a move, this conversation is my gift to you. Enjoy. So thanks everybody for joining me here. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide on the warrior journey. So today is a conversation about what happens when you embrace the experiences of life to inform, but also to expand your perspective. How do you step out of yourself and see that one of the secrets to living a big, full life is to be able to step out of yourself and ask others for perspective, ask others for help, and then to make adjustments with that wisdom. And I couldn't think of a better guest than Maryanne Spatola to have this conversation with. Thank you so much, Maryanne, for being in the conversation today.
Thank you for asking me. My pleasure.
I'm so psyched to get into this because I know you're going to be talking about some stuff that anybody that's watching or listening is going to want to really take in, apply to maybe how they're seeing themselves. But I know you're also going to share some personal things that I think are really, really important to the journey. So, today's conversation is all about this idea of expansiveness and being in that state of expansiveness. And when you think about the word expand, let's just start with that. What images, thoughts, feelings come to mind? What does it mean to you?
First thing that pops in my mind is growth. For me, expansion is all about extending yourself, spreading your wings, stepping into new territories that you haven't touched before, places you haven't been before, metaphorically and literally, right? And it can be both exciting and frightening all at the same time when you step into those uncertain, unknown spaces that you kind of push yourself to get into.
And why did you say yes to this conversation about talking about this?
I love talking about transformation on a personal level and on a professional level. And I think those two are very intertwined. You don't get to one without the other. You have to grow in all places. But I just find this topic both fascinating, exciting, and of course, having a conversation with you, I would never miss that opportunity.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So, as I shared in the introduction, Maryanne has a ton of different life and professional experiences. And I would love for you to share some wisdom about yourself, but to do it a little differently. I want
Mhm.
you to zoom out for a second and just imagine yourself observing your career experience. And I'd love for you to describe it for me and everybody watching and listening right now, like as if it were a commercial, or even better, like an introduction to the documentary on the career of Maryanne Spatola.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. It's not over yet. It's still
Right.
unfolding. But I guess the visual that kind of comes to mind when I think about it in those terms, what popped in my head immediately was, remember the famous Walt Disney image of him looking in the mirror and he saw the mouse? The
Yeah.
mouse was looking back at him. For me, when I look in that mirror, my current self looking at my younger self, I
Mm.
would see Wonder Woman. And the interesting part about that is I didn't know she was there until later in my life, both on a personal level and in a professional sense. But, if I look back and say, where did you start? I'd always been fiercely independent. It was just in my DNA. I never accepted this notion of inequality. I always sought out diverse perspectives, and I didn't understand why that wasn't an okay thing.
Mm.
Why people who look different or talk different or come from different places aren't always accepted. It just never made sense to me. There was something innately in me that said that's just not right.
Where does that come from? Was that taught to you growing up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was lived experiences I had, in neighborhoods I grew up in. My parents, I often describe my parents as Archie and Edith Bunker.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I grew up with. And, there were a lot of things my parents tried to impose on me that I just rejected
Like what?
at a very young age. Like even in elementary school, I had a black friend. This was like fourth or fifth grade, and I wasn't allowed to go to her house.
Mm.
I'm like, why not? Like, what is that? She has a house just like we do. She lives right up the block. It doesn't make any damn sense. And so I was always a rebel and fiercely independent with my own thinking. But I didn't recognize the power of it or how to really harness it until much later in my life.
Mm. So let's peel that back a bit, because I would love for you to take us. This fiercely independent woman starts her first career. What was she like? And then I want you to take us to current day. What is she like?
Yeah. So my very first job, so let's back up a second because there was a personal experience that kind of led me to that first job,
Mm-hmm.
which was my first year of college. So I went off to college right out of high school, like most traditional children do these days. Did my first year, loved it, got good grades, and got my first year tuition bill. So my parents weren't financially secure. They didn't offer me assistance. I was struggling to figure out how to make this work. And I looked at for the tuition bill and time, quick math times four, whatever could I do from a career standpoint to pay that back. So I dropped out.
Mm.
So 1 year of college under my belt and I quit. And that's what led me to my first job. I got it, classic what I know now. I pride myself on having a strong community and network. That's how I got my first job. a friend of mine was working at a big insurance company and said, "Hey, we've got this job opening. What do you think?" I'm like, "Oh, that sounds great." So I went off and I became a personal lines underwriter in the world of insurance. And I loved it, right? So I was young, in love, having a great experience on my first job. I had lots of different experiences on my first job. You know, if I look back at my resume, I changed jobs every 5 years just because I got bored. I always liked a new challenge. That's that expansion piece. I always had this desire to grow, do new things.
How do you know when you need to expand? What is it that happens to you?
I get restless.
Okay.
Don't feel challenged. Anything that becomes the mundane, rote, like repetitive, oh, I'm doing that again, means it's time for me to move. And I've learned to kind of sprinkle that in along the way so it's not as dramatic or crazy as it was at some points in my life. But
You know, the reason I ask you that too, which I think a lot of people that are watching and listening can identify with. So you get restless, you get a little bored, you know you need to shift. I get more emotional because I see repeat things happening, and I'm like, didn't I see this story already?
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting. It causes the same reaction as like,
Yeah.
well, so I get more irritated and frustrated, and I'm like, yeah, it's time for me to do something different. It's just very interesting.
That's the contextual piece of it. You know, I felt more of that when I was inside organizations. Because it became, in fact, you know, when I left one of my big jobs, that was exactly the reason. It was a repeat scenario of things we had just done that came unwound, and we had to start all over. And they started asking the same questions and doing the same work. And I'm like, we just did this 3 years ago. What are we doing?
Right.
And the other part of it for me is when it gets incongruent with who I am. So I've had positions where I was the head of talent, and yet our executives were not walking the talk. And so here I was, the face of talent, you know, telling our employees, oh, you can be whatever and grow in this way and, you know, be on a succession plan and have a path. And the reality was it didn't happen. They kept hiring from the outside and not promoting from within. And yet that was the story I was peddling. And it just got to a point where it was so incongruent with my own beliefs and values, and I just couldn't continue to be that face when I knew it wasn't a reality.
There's that fiercely independent thinker that says, why do I have to follow what everybody else is saying and thinking?
Yeah, and why aren't you doing what you said you're going to do?
So take us now through your career path. Like I said, you talked about Wonder Woman in the mirror. So take us to current day. Who's Maryanne?
Maryanne is a curious relationship builder who loves to help people learn and grow. At the end of the day, that is the essence of what I do, is I connect with people, get to know them, understand where they're trying to go, and then help them figure out how to get there, right? At the end of the day, my belief, you know, in our coaching world, people know intuitively, they have an inner wisdom of who they are and who they want to be. And it's helping to reveal that so people can get to those places, to get out of the ego, logical left brain that holds us back from stepping into the beauty and wisdom of who we really are.
You know what's so interesting about you, and I know anybody that's, again, listening or watching this, you have a very calm, neutral way of communicating, not too high, not too low. What's your shadow side?
The shadow side is, you know, that duck on top of the water that looks like they're just gliding, but underneath their feet are going 100 miles an hour. I sometimes get into that spin when I get into really pushing myself out to places, almost in that panic zone, right? Out of comfort into push. You push too hard, you end up in panic. And sometimes I have unintentionally ended up in panic. And so that's when the shadow side comes out and the self-doubt. And I wrote about it at the end of my series last year on Monday Metaphors for Work, right? So putting myself out there on social media and exposing some of my inner concerns and challenges and the ugly head that rears from the shadows, the
Mm-hmm.
self-doubt, the lack of confidence, what will other people think? And then you just get to a place where it doesn't really matter anymore. I am who I am, and that's okay.
Mm. How do you steady yourself when you feel like, whoa, I'm way out here now?
Yeah, it's meditation for me. I have a mindful practice that I'm pretty religious about. I do it regularly on a daily basis. I also lean into, and this has been a big lesson for me, is leaning into what the universe is showing me.
Mm.
That was a huge lesson for me. There was a point in my career where I was so frustrated. I probably should have quit 2 years earlier, and I didn't. And I must have applied for 15 or 20 different jobs in that 2-year window. I just wanted out. And then I finally came to a place of peace to say, you're done. Right? You have to make that mental marker, I'm done. You're either going to accept where you are and be okay with it, or you're going to move on. And moving on can show up in a lot of different ways. And as soon as I let that go and gave it to the universe and said, just show me which way I'm supposed to go, literally within a month, a networking opportunity for the top job dropped in my lap. And 4 months later, I was in that seat. But it wasn't until I gave up, until I let go of it and stopped trying to control it, that it actually worked out. And one of the best career moves of my entire career.
I'm so glad that you gave that example because a lot of us are very A-type
Hmm.
and we can operationalize the hell out of anything.
That's right.
Especially someone like me, I've got executionitis. Give me an idea and I'll action it to
Yep.
a fault.
Yeah.
And what happens is we get so focused on making stuff happen instead of saying, I seeded for this, let me allow. Let me
That's
be
right.
receptive to whatever you believe, universe
That's right.
downloads, there's all sorts of ways you can get wisdom and access.
Hmm.
But you took your hands off the reins and said, no, I'm
I
going to
did.
allow this to happen. I'm going to allow
Yeah.
this to come to me.
And what the other thing I learned out of that was just noticing all of the things that are actually showing up for me that I was missing. I wasn't paying attention to. I was so immersed in trying to make what I thought was right, what I thought was the next thing for me happen, when in reality, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. You asked before about, my early career and where I am today. What's really fascinating to me is if I step back and look at my career, I ended up in the CHRO seat, top position in my field. But all of the experiences I had at every stage of my career are what prepared me for that. You go back to that computer programmer job, it was all about logic, reason, process, data, people, and putting it all together. And that's how I ended up in a CHRO seat. If you had asked me in my early days as a personal lines underwriter, would you ever be a chief human resource officer? I would have told you you're out of your mind. I said, what the hell is that?
I was going to say, what's that?
Who knew, right? But when you look back at it from a reflective state, every opportunity I had was an installment of what helped me be successful when I did make my way to that very top job.
One of the questions I was just thinking about too, as somebody who's been in the workplace a long, long, long time, when I started my career, you thought of HR as
Uh,
compensation, benefits, and where you go when you have issues.
mm-hmm.
As someone who is fiercely independent, also very creative, and believes in really using experiences to drive your perspective, what was like top things that you brought to that chief human resources role that changed it into much more of you're about human capital.
Mm-hmm.
You are a talent leadership guru. How did you bring your superpowers to that?
I think there were a couple of things that differentiated me in that seat. First and foremost was it was about business strategy, right? So if you look at my headline on LinkedIn, it says optimizing business performance at the intersection of talent and strategy. And that captures the essence of who I am as a leader, and certainly how I approached being a chief human resource officer. It
Mm.
all starts there. And one of the attractive things to that role that I accepted was the CEO understood that. He wasn't a HR aficionado, but he
Mhm.
knew enough that if he didn't have a CHRO in that seat who understood talent and how it connects to strategy, that he would never achieve the aggressive growth plan he had for the organization. So that was first and foremost. Secondly, I would say I showed up as an executive leader, like any other executive leader on the team. I didn't just show up as the functional HR person, although that was part of my role, but I had to be part of that executive team. I had to lead the organization in a similar way the CEO did or the CFO did, and be a good partner with that senior team to make that work. And then lastly, I think the other thing that helps me tremendously and ties into my academic ventures is that I am all about the future of work and where we're headed and being more progressive about what HR is meant to do and how HR shows up in the organization and how we look at talent, where we find talent, how do we grow and develop talent. And so that, I think, is when you put that combination together, I can bring in theory about what's happening, research on the latest trends, but make it very practical in a way
Mhm.
that works and fits for our business and fits for our demographic. And so I think that was a pretty powerful combination. And again, those experiences I had early on, I didn't start my career in HR. I started on the business side. And I think that gave me a very different lens about what HR is all about, right? So I understand what it's like to be on the other side of the desk and know how difficult it is to get certain things done or struggle when I can't get the workforce that I need or the talent doesn't have the skills that it needs. How do you make all that work? How do you keep them engaged and motivated? Um, so those are the three things I think really made a difference.
Mm. Well, obviously, we're also here to talk about the good and the bad experiences. Some call it defining moments,
Yeah.
others call it the crucible moment. I'd love for you to hone in on, I'd love a professional and a personal example.
Yeah.
You call it defining, call it crucible, whatever rocks your world and how you're going to articulate it. I'd love for you to share. So start with the professional first.
Sure. On the professional side, the thing that I think was my defining moment, my crucible moment, actually happened much later in my career. But I was in the head talent role and we had a company offsite. I had worked with the COO on my presentation. I was leading the charge around diversity and inclusion, which they'd never had before.
Mm.
Kind of goes back to my roots about, this is not right. And we were, I was putting ideas out there that were divergent from what was popular in the organization. And so I had rallied a group that we had a council together. I had talked to them before this meeting. We kind of had it all set up on the path we would be on to drive positive change for the organization, how it was connected to the strategy. The COO, we had all these conversations about how he was going to help me lead my way through it. And we got to the meeting, probably 60 plus top leaders in the organization. And I didn't get off of slide 2.
Ooh.
And I got pummeled it. And the questions quickly became antagonistic.
Mm.
They were shooting my ideas down, and it became a pile-on. And not one of my diversity council members and not the COO, who had promised to partner with me, stood up for me. They let me hang.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, the unfortunate part for me was I did the femme fatale. So I kind of kept it all in until I couldn't keep it out. To your point about emotional,
Mm.
I really I was imploding. I was trying to hold it all in. I just couldn't take it. I kept trying to engage people to join me in my party, and nobody would do it. So I went in the bathroom, had my meltdown because we had gone on break. And the woman who was sitting next to me came in and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be fine." I said, "But do me a favor, go back to the desk, just sweep all my stuff into my briefcase and bring it here for me." She goes, "Why?" I said, "Just do it for me." She went, got all my stuff off the desk, packed it in my suitcase, in my briefcase, came and gave it to me, and I walked out. I literally did a walk off. And it was an emotional reaction without question. But again, I hit that breaking point, and I knew that, my husband and I had many conversations about today may be the day I come home with boxes. Today may be the day I come home with only a briefcase. And I was okay with that, right? That was the breaking point I was at because I just wasn't going to allow for it. What was interesting was that COO saw me. We were at a conference center, and he ran after me. So here I am boogieing out to the parking lot, and I look behind me, and here he comes. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? And I just kept going because I wasn't sure he was coming for me. I thought maybe it was just on break. And I look back again, and he's like right on my heels. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I just kept walking. And I finally got to the edge of the parking lot, and I stopped, and I said, "What do you want?" And he just looked at me, and he said, "I'm sorry, I should have jumped in. I didn't." He's all apologetic. And I said, "It's over, right? I'm not doing this anymore. This is what you asked me to do. I have no support. Nobody's willing to partner with me. All I'm doing is getting pummeled on. And you're letting that happen. I'm not going back in there." And so he kept me cool for a few minutes and promised me if I came back in, he would redirect it, we'd get through it, and we would move on. So I gave him that opportunity. And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll come back, but my expectation is you're going to redirect this crowd so I can get through my presentation and we can move on." And I stayed. We did that. We went back. I pulled myself together. I finished the presentation. The meeting came to an end, and I just left. I sent him a quick text and said, "I'm just leaving after this is over. I don't want to talk about it now. I need some time just to regroup and rethink and get out." And so I think I scared the crap out of him. I think he thought I was just going to really quit, which I was ready to do. But the long and short of it was, it took me about a week, and it led to some really great conversations with the COO, with the CEO, with the council members who, failed to step in and step up. And it was a real defining moment for me about what I would not tolerate, both professionally or organizationally. I tended to get overinvested in the results. And I was so frustrated that nobody understood this was the path we needed to be on. Intellectually, they would say yes, yes, yes. But when it came to actually stepping into it and doing it, nobody was willing to do it.
Wow, what a story, Maryanne.
Yeah.
Oh, what courage it took for you to go back in and carry that forward.
And to even come back to the workplace. I mean, I had executive leaders from those field offices who were silently in my camp, weren't willing to put themselves out there to be in my camp publicly, but call me afterwards to say, "I can't believe you pulled yourself back together and came back in. Thank you for doing that." I had women calling me to say, "Thank you for having the courage to stick through this."
That is an incredible story. I mean, oh my goodness. All right, so now tell us the personal story.
So remember I told you I dropped out of college,
Yep.
got my first job, started working. I was always ambitious, always wanted to move on. Like I said, I needed to feel challenged and do different things. And I was able to apply for and get promotions a couple of times in my early career, and it was terrific. And so I had this illusion that I was on a great career ride, and here I go. Until I applied for a job and I didn't get it. And my boss took me aside and said, until you get your degree, you're not going any further.
Mm.
And that was a real wake up call for me personally, because I always valued a college education. I just never realized the importance or significance of it in order to keep advancing my career. So here I was, married, three small children, two elderly parents whom I was the caregiver, main caregiver for, and they were declining in health. So I had all those issues going on. And I went back to school.
Mm.
So I went back to college. I did it at night for a little over 4 years to finish my undergrad, just to get that done. And then I was on that treadmill and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to keep going. And I applied for my master's and I got into NYU, which was woohoo, big accomplishment just even getting in. I was thinking, wow, how do I do that? Another networking opportunity. Um, and I just kept persevering. And, I used it as an opportunity to show my children this is what
Mm.
your hard work is all about. And I used to tease my kids if they got anything less than an A on a paper. Okay, mom just got an A. Okay. I got a full-time job, three kids, a husband, and elderly parents, and I got an A. No crap from you. Back to the books. But personally, for me, it was a real learning opportunity, defining moments in terms of how to manage yourself, how to
Mm.
manage all of these multiple things. I think as women, we think we can do it all. I was certainly one of those believers, and trying to keep all the plates spinning and being able to still focus and get my goals accomplished was a big dream. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so much so, even when I got to the end of my master's, again, timing and paying attention to the universe, I needed three classes in a specific order in order to finish. And lo and behold, registration opens, and whoa, from the universe, here's your gift. But what it meant was I was taking a Tuesday, Thursday evening class and a Saturday class for an entire semester in order to get that all done.
Mm.
And so it was like the final push in your marathon, right? 2 more miles, you can make it, and off you go. And so I did it, and was one of the biggest accomplishments. What was really touching for me too, when I graduated my master's, my parents had passed during that time. My oldest brother and I were the only two siblings left. And so my brother flew to my graduation to be with me. And I'm like, why are you doing that? And he said, because dad never did it for me, and I want to
Oh.
be there for you, right? One of those touching
Oh.
personal sibling moments. So here's my brother flies up from South Carolina just to come to my ceremony, to
Mm.
be with me, to be a support, to acknowledge the accomplishment, and, just be there with me. It was very touching.
Wow. Two really moving stories. What did you get from both of them? I mean, I have so many questions, of course. I could do a whole podcast on that first scenario, like, what about this? What about that? And how about da 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 da? But name it for us. Like, what are the things that you're taking from those two experiences? And it's obviously still very present in your life. I can feel it even when you're describing it.
Yeah.
What did you take, or what does it look like when you think about those experiences and how you're applying it to your experience today?
There's a big part of it for me, which is the grit,
Hmm.
right? Just being resilient, hanging in there when it gets tough, find a new way, figure it out, make it work. It's just a big part of my DNA and who I am. It's that perseverance, it's resilience. You can describe it in a lot of
Right.
ways, but I never give up. I'll hit the wall and I'll back up and look at that wall and see if there's a different way to go. Under it, around it, through it, whatever it's going to be, but I'm going to get there. And I
Mm.
always believe that. The other piece that is, I think, a real gift of all these experiences is to recognize that life and love are fleeting, that we need to live in every moment and experience every moment in the fullness of what is presented to us. And, I've lost my mom when I was 37. Um, I was a generation baby, so there's 19 years between me and my oldest sibling. And so what that translates to is I've lost almost all of my loved ones that, from my parents' family. Parents are gone, all my aunts and uncles are gone. And we've lost some dear friends along the way,
Mm.
even at a young age. And so I never take time or the people I love for granted, knowing that tomorrow could be a different day. And I
Mm.
always want to make sure that people I love and care for know that I love and care for them, that I can be there for them in their time of need or to support them and always be part of that journey. And the last piece of it really is, and I've really come into this at this point in my life, is to let the universe drive. And it's much easier to say than do, but I focus in on my meditation practices and listening for that inner wisdom to show up and help guide me to where I'm supposed to be, who I'm supposed to be with, what I'm supposed to be doing, and let it happen.
Mm. I want to leave us with this one last question. You have this great expression that you used in the Facebook Live conversation we had on Monday. Move to the balcony to
Mm.
observe your life. Say more about that.
That's that mindful practice, right? That's the get out of your head and into your body and understand what's going on. One of the most fun adventures I've had is to dive deeper into developing this mindfulness practice. And that's a big part of it, right? It's developing your awareness, it's being fully present in the moment. And moving to the balcony is my way of describing that experience. It's just being present in the moment and noticing, right? It's not about doing anything about it. It's observing what's going on and not judging it, not trying to manipulate or change it, but understanding what it is and where you are and what does that mean for you. And so it's about taking that pause. It's about gratitude, and it's about noticing things that you probably aren't noticing that are important that you might be missing.
When do you know you need to go to the balcony?
For me, it's when I get caught up in that moment, right? When I feel that frenzy of busyness
Mm.
is when that's my signal. Or if I feel the worry or the fear start to emerge, it's time to take a pause. I have it written in my daily mantras about sit in silence twice a day, making sure I find time to do that, just to allow that positive energy and inner wisdom to come through. And I pay attention to what's happening during the day. So when I start to feel that anxious, is when I know it's time to move to the balcony. What's going on here?
I'm smiling because I'm like, yeah, you got to make sure it's a balcony, not a cliff.
That's right.
There's
That
a
panic.
difference.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Maryanne, for sharing all that you have. So much there,
Yeah.
so much there, and how you are just living so true to this idea of observing and reaching out, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom, but also asking for guidance, for
That's right.
support, and doing something with those experiences that is just continuing to expand your capacity in your current way of being. And one of the things that really struck me from today is how love and relationships can be fleeting. You're
Yes.
right. And it is really important to live so fully in each moment, even the tough stuff.
Yep.
And just to recognize is that's creating a dimension to your experience. So, what a beautiful conversation. I'm so
Thank you
deeply
so much.
grateful.
Yeah. Well, I'm so deeply grateful for all the work you're doing to make this happen. You are the warrior yourself out there leading the way for so many of us to share these experiences and to help others on their journey. So I greatly appreciate being part of it with you.
Thanks to everybody for listening to another episode of Warriors at Work and letting us be a part of your warrior journey. You can ask questions and make suggestions for future topics at jc@jeanniecoomber.com. Connect with me personally on LinkedIn and Instagram, and join us on the Warrior Conversations channel on YouTube and at the Warrior Magic Community page on Facebook. You can find links to all these places on my website, jeanniecoomber.com, and most importantly, be sure to tell friends about us, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Spreaker, and Spotify. It helps others find the show and puts more warrior magic out into the world.